And so lighting control systems were developed to manage these large square footprint homes and to bring in and integrate with the AV system. Now, from an aesthetic standpoint, and we've taught some classes here that talk about how technology can blend in with design, this was another reason why these systems were invented. So, you would walk into some of these houses and you would see just walls of switches and dimmers and what we like to call wall acne or clutter. And it was a guessing game on which load controlled what, unless you had like P-touch labels. And so then the decorator had to get creative with hiding plants and things to disguise this stuff. So, you had these really complex layered lighting systems with multiple wall box dimmers that were tied to each load. And in these large houses, it's pretty common in a big great room, you have 12 different loads, which requires 12 switches. Trying to figure out which switch controlled what was challenging. If you had a 4 and 5-way switch leg, so let's say you had 12 loads in the house, but you want to be able to control it on multiple sides of or 12 loads in a room, you want to control it on multiple sides of the room, you're literally doubling the amount of switches. So this was a problem. And so lighting control was developed to kind of pare this down. And so when we started designing and building lighting control systems, it was to consolidate that kind of wall clutter or wall acne. And so we could do something as simple as put everything onto one keypad. And so in this example, you see we have direct control of specific loads, but then we can also introduce scenes. And so now a client could have outdoor lights tied to an astronomical time clock where lights, come on at sunset and then go off at dawn. Right? That just happens automatically. And then we can tie things and program them into, scenes like, party or good night or arrive. And so with technology improving, we were able to implement that into the lighting control systems. And it was pretty easy to sell a client because they didn't want to see that wall clutter. They wanted to condense everything down into one lighting keypad. And so the components of a lighting control system is really kind of 3 different things. You have your lighting fixtures, and in a lot of homes, 30% of the house is using decorative light fixtures, so chandeliers or light for artwork, and then 60% of the house is basic recessed lighting. And so controlling that lighting, we would require some sort of dimming technology, and I'll talk about kind of the advent of the light bulb in a little bit, but nowadays we have to use specific drivers or other types of things to control that fixture. And then you have the actual lighting control system. So this is an example of a lighting control system where you have a keypad, and then you have these enclosures with proprietary module enclosures and modules for dimming, which have a mix of high voltage and low voltage. But essentially, this is the makeup of a lighting control system. And if you've ever been to a house, you've probably seen in the garage or an equipment room, these giant wall panels that house all the different modules. And so over time, technology improved, and it started with the light bulb. And so clients started adapting, CFL technology. Some of that was kind of mandated by the government, and then LEDs. But both these things, although it was new technology and it had some improvements in terms of like wattage levels, it brought a whole nother level of complexity. CFL lights do not look the greatest. It's very harsh light. And LEDs, because there wasn't a lot of standards, you'd have inconsistent color temperatures. So you had 4 LED lights in a room, but they all looked kind of different. Furthermore, both bulbs have really a hard time dimming at lower levels. So if you're trying to dim the light, below 20% or 10%, you'd get this like flicker effect. Most people think 10% is a pretty dimmed light, and it's really not. You want something to dim below 5% to get the real effect. But so all this just added complexity to these lighting control systems. And so again, it just required the need for some advancements in tech. The other problem too over time is maintenance of these systems became a little bit of a challenge. And so this shows you that equipment room where we have your dedicated circuits or your electrical panels that are powering, and then you have the load panels. It requires specific wiring, and controlling a single load was not always linear. So sometimes people looked at the cost as like a cost per load, or this would get built and designed and installed when the house was being constructed. But then after construction, there was some afterthought of adding additional loads, and it made added difficulty to the system. It wasn't a very streamlined system. The other challenge over time too is the keypads. So the keypads were very specific with programming. So somebody would have to program each individual keypad. And if you decide that, well, after 6 months of living here, we'd like to change these keypads, it requires additional programming. You might have to get some engravings done. So again, this just added a little bit of complexity as the advancement of lighting control systems continued. And then some of the user interfaces. This is a very early on user interface for a lighting control system and a control and automation system, but the touchscreen experiences weren't always consistent. Lists of the loads or the reflected ceiling pans, just really, really hard to navigate. And the proprietary screens were really expensive. This was something that was well before the iPad was invented. So there's a lot of new technology with lighting control systems. Looking at the history, we're going to start with fixtures. And fixtures have come a long way, from the CFL and LED days. Fixtures these days have a lot of different benefits. First of all, they have consistent temperatures. So again, when you have multiple fixtures inside of a room, you want the temperatures to be consistent so everything looks the same, especially if you have lots of different colors and textures and artwork in the space. Lower energy usage. So a lot of people are becoming more conscious of their type of energy usage or their green footprint. And a lot of these new LED fixtures are much less in wattage. Typical old light bulbs would be 60 to 100 watts. Finding a lot of these new fixtures are 10 to 15 watts. Variable color temperatures, including warm light. And I'm going to talk about the wellness effect on that just slightly. But with the advancements in technologies, we can do a lot of really cool things by varying the color temperature. So I mentioned briefly on wellness, and it sounds like you guys have a wellness seminar coming up. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But again, with the advent of the light bulb, we can vary color temperatures to mimic the outside natural light. WRGB color technology, again, it's come a long way. And some people look at WRGB color technology as, well, it's kind of cool, but I'm not really interested in changing colors of my house. But there's some really unique things you can do with it, and I'll show some examples of that. And then options for the low voltage control. So having the ability to control these light fixtures using low voltage techniques. So when we look at fixture technology, I talked about consistent temperatures. And so in this space, you see there's upwards of 12 fixtures, I believe, and the color temperature is consistent. If we had inconsistent fixtures, our textures of the fabric and the wood and the artwork would look different. So how's that accomplished? Well, first of all, you want to choose a high quality fixture manufacturer. A lot of times when homes are being built, the GC or the electrician will spec in just a really inexpensive fixture. And while they may be using LED technology, a low quality fixture is going to bring inconsistency. It's also going to be very difficult for us to control it because there are no standards. So high quality fixtures, manufacturers use something called binning. And binning is where they take the parts that are used to build the LED fixture. So from the board to the driver to the LED chipset, and it's held to a very strict quality control standard. So again, usually when you're choosing a high quality manufacturer, it's going to bring up the cost of the fixture, but you're going to get that consistent temperature, which is really important, especially in a home such as this. Also, again, I mentioned like these newer fixtures also bring lower energy usage. So anywhere from 10 to 15 watts per fixture is what we're finding. So I mentioned color. And so, now LED technology can mimic the warmth of an incandescent light bulb. That was really the benefit of an incandescent light. As you dimmed it, the bulb got warmer and gave you that glowing effect, which is more realistic and looks more like natural light. CFL lights don't do that. They kind of stay this like static color temperature. And even a lot of the entry level LEDs, although you can choose your Kelvin temperature, a lot of people choose a 3000 or a 2700, which is pretty natural. When you dim that fixture, it really doesn't change in color temperature. And a lot of times a 3000 or 2700 Kelvin temperature, as you dim it, it actually starts to get gray. And that has effect on our body and how we respond, but it also has an effect on the finishes, in your house. So when you get into lighting fixtures, you can get into something that's called warm to dim or warm dim. Every manufacturer calls it something different, but literally that fixture can get warmer as it dims, like an incandescent light bulb. And so that's something you should look for as a standard at the very least. But you can also get into something called tunable white, and that's where we can actually adjust the Kelvin temperature inside of the light bulb. So we can go from 3000 Kelvin to 2700 to 1500. If you want to look like an operating room, we can go all the way up to 6000. So, but you have that flexibility. And with that brings this wellness aspect where things can be scheduled to our natural circadian rhythm. What you can see in this picture here, though, is really the effects of the space. On the left, we have a very fixed high Kelvin temperature. And as you go into the different photos, you can see that Kelvin temperature is adjusting, becoming warmer, and you can see the effects of the space based on that. On the far left is something that I think I would prefer in the morning. It would help wake me up, help energize me. But as I go throughout the day, I'm going to want something a little bit more warmer to kind of bring me down. And that brings us into the wellness benefits. So humans have been around long before the light bulb. And so, back in the caveman days, they were used to waking up at sunrise and going to bed at sunset. And that whole effect is tied to what's called our circadian rhythm, or our internal time clock. It's how we respond to light. And so this is what a true circadian rhythm light cycle looks like. So this is backed by science. And basically, this is what the Kelvin temperature of the sun is in the morning and changes throughout the day. So it looks very similar to the slide I showed you before. And so this affects and helps us wake up in the morning, stimulate us throughout the day, and then also get us ready for bed in the evening time. And this is something that's been around in the commercial space for a long time, as people were looking to kind of energize their employees throughout the day. And they did that by adjusting Kelvin temperatures. And now that technology is available for the home. And so this takes a deeper dive in how light affects us. And again, it sounds like there's a great seminar coming up that's probably going to go further than me, but this shows the different types of Kelvin temperature that how our body responds throughout the day. Melatonin is what helps us with sleep. Some people actually take it to help them sleep, but we have melatonin being produced inside our bodies naturally. And what does that is light. And so I think everybody's probably seen studies on the blue light from our phones and how that affects us. And reading these things at night actually depresses melatonin production. And that's why it keeps you awake. And so light affects us. And this is a great example of how it affects us. And so with a fixture that is tunable white and a control system that can control that fixture, we can actually change the lighting throughout the day automatically on a time clock schedule, which is really cool. So I mentioned WRGB and how it adds color to the space. This is a really great photo, and interior designers really like this aspect of, one is, if we didn't have a high quality fixture, we'd have inconsistent temperatures, which would really disrupt how this image shows. But in this case, we're using a really high quality fixture, but you can see by changing the light or the color of the light. So now we're not just adjusting color temperature, we're actually introducing some color mixtures, and we can accent different things in the room. So maybe you just want it on one setting all the time. Maybe throughout the day, or depending on the type of party or entertaining you're doing, you want to highlight different things. So you can see, in the first picture in the top left, we're really accenting the furniture and the floor and the materials. And then on the right, we're really focusing on that centerpiece. And then in the bottom left, we have more of this warm glow natural effect. And then throughout all these photos, the art pieces in the back credenza and the built-in are actually being accented. So with WRGB, you can literally paint the walls using color versus using different materials, which means the space can change. A lot of these interfaces allow you to dial in the exact WRGB code. So in commercial spaces, let's say we were doing a property for Hilton. Hilton has a very specific blue color they use. With these control systems, we can dial in that specific color. So again, with these next generation lighting controls, it allows us to rethink what we're doing, but we can find the perfect balance of not just color, performance, optics, really everything for the space. So let's talk about how the controls work. So before I showed you a control system that has a breaker panel, but then also has specific low voltage controls for the lighting loads. Some of these new systems can literally work inside of a breaker panel. So what you're seeing there is what looks like a standard electrical panel, but inside is actually lighting control modules. And so this reduces our footprint, and in some cases can actually be bringing the cost down from a traditional lighting control system. And also, that's actually also showing a high voltage control system. And some of these benefits I showed you can exist in either a high voltage or low voltage system. And just to touch on that real quick, that's another class we teach, but a high voltage system is usually when we're doing a retrofit. Somebody's got an existing construction, your lighting loads and your light switches are already wired. And so we change out for a lighting control system that utilizes high voltage. Whereas a low voltage controlled system is typically done at new construction or a massive retrofit because it does require specific lighting. So on the right, I'm showing some low voltage controls. And so to do some of the things I mentioned, like changing color or doing the tunable white, that's going to require a specific type of controller, which is a 0 to 10 or DMX. And these are specific protocols that have been around for years. DMX is used a lot in the commercial environment, in nightclubs where you have all these different types of colors that are happening. And 0 to 10 has been used in a lot of different spaces as well. And so with DMX, again, this is an industry protocol where things are digitally addressed. So it gives you a real high visibility of the light fixture and the ability to control it. You're able to address zones differently, and it makes it more flexible because through very simple programming, you can group different rooms together. And we can digitally control the color and the intensity of the fixture. That allows us to get this accurate rendering that we talked about. It eliminates the need for traditional switch-like wiring. So literally, DMX lights can be daisy chained together to be controlled off of a single wire. And 0 to 10, so DMX is usually used when we're doing WRGB. So we have a high level of control because we're adjusting intensity and we're choosing all these different types of colors, whereas 0 to 10 is typically used when we're doing just the tunable white. And tunable white is, the type of fixture that we want to link to, wellness and our circadian rhythm. Just to be clear, a WRGB fixture can do multicolor, but also do tunable white versus a tunable white fixture, which is just for a tunable white effect or wellness. And we can clear that up in Q&A if there's additional questions, because there is different costs associated with both fixtures. Some people just want to have a well-lit home with the wellness effect and have no interest in the multicolor. So going back to the new generation of high voltage controls, again, not all fixtures are low voltage. Especially like decorative or oriented fixtures, chandeliers are usually very high powered, so we still have to run a traditional high voltage offering. But these new form factors create a lot of simplicity. So again, in the design phase of, you don't need as much space as you would with a traditional lighting control system. We can do it in a simple type of breaker panel. And behind the scenes, there's so much we can do with the lighting control system because a lot of it has to do with the fixtures, again, with the type of intensity, type of color changing. And these systems can also be tied into shades and other aspects of the system. So we're not using all these siloed independent systems. It's all pulled in to one centralized system. User interfaces have been updated substantially. So now with some of these control systems, we still have keypads with scenes, but a lot of these scenes can be updated through the iPad app or the phone app, and that can be done by the end user versus having a lot of different programming that has to be done. Or the programming can be done remotely, which is much easier than in some of the traditional manners. Touch panels have been updated as well. So the advent of the iPad brought forth a slew of technology for the touch panels. And so we have a major update with touch panels and user interfaces that are more consistent. Our touch panels look exactly like our phones or our iPads or other tablets. So there's a level of consistency throughout. Whereas before, a lot of these touch panel interfaces look completely different to what we're used to using on a daily basis. And taking a deeper dive into the user interfaces, there's been massive updates of how we're controlling all these things. So I mentioned WRGB with an almost infinite amount of color selection and adjusting your natural light and your different Kelvin temperatures. You need to have a nice, easy to use interface for that. So in this case, we're showing the ability to use a nice color pick wheel using a heart to favorite color. So it's easy to recall those colors back at a later date. Also the ability to dial in an exact WRGB color code. And then all these things can be saved into scenes so they can be recalled at a moment's notice. So, with having all this flexibility, why not have a nice, simple, easy to use interface? And I mentioned scenes before too. So again, scenes and timers, all these things nowadays can be edited and done at the homeowner level or remotely from the integrator. So again, it simplifies some of that process and is much easier than some of the traditional ways of programming and updating these systems. And when it comes to tunable white, we can show different things here, but again, with the user interface, having that easy to use flexibility of adjusting that tunable white, again, because you have so much flexibility, having this nice, easy to use interface where you can take things from a sunrise to a sunlight to a natural light or an early morning setting, just at the simple push of a button and a little bit of a slide of the user interface. And then again, the ability to pull up all your favorite colors at the push of a button that you've previously saved. WRGB has, again, another very similar user interface, but with the advent of the color pick wheel and the ability to save those favorites. And then, as I mentioned, dialing in that RGB color, RGBW color. So if you're trying to get that specific, Tiffany blue, Victoria's Secret pink, or whatever that color palette is that you're trying to recreate in the house, we can do that now with the advent of some of these user interfaces. Another side benefit too is energy management. So again, I mentioned earlier that a lot of these fixtures have a lower wattage and people are wanting to monitor their usage and consumption. And these lighting control systems now have the ability to actually monitor what a system is using. So through the new types of control modules, we're able to pass power through there and see how much is being consumed, when it was being consumed. And this also could be used in a dedicated load panel. So a lot of these properties have generators with a critical load panel, and we can incorporate these things into a standard electrical panel just to measure the consumption and actually give the client the flexibility of shedding loads based on what their usage is when they're in a power outage situation. So huge advancements in this type of technology. And that wraps it up. I'm going to exit out. I don't know if any questions came in.
No, I don't see any questions. Wow, that was fascinating. I didn't realize that user interface had matured so much since the last time I've seen it.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions that I'll prompt you here with and that occurred to me. One question that I get a lot when it comes into lighting control and keypads is control of ceiling fans. And as you know, it seems like every manufacturer out there is like a boy in a bubble where they don't consider their outside surroundings. So in the case of ceiling fans, they're all providing remotes with RF control because they think everybody, is just connecting it to constant power, and they need to control the fan and possibly a light independently from a fixture that was only wired with constant power. So maybe you could comment on that and how you go about considering that. I can tell you how I answer that very simply. When you want to integrate ceiling fans and lights in ceiling fans to the to the control system, is if your fan will remember its speed, if you turn the breaker off, like let's say you set it on high and then go kill power to it, literally kill power. Don't use the remote that comes with it. Kill power. Wait about 5 minutes, go turn it on. Does it come back to the same setting? The answer to that is yes. It's compatible with about every control system that's out there. If it's no, if it resets to off, then find another one. That's my acid test. Do you have another thought on that?
I really don't, and mainly because I don't get involved at that level like you, because you guys are the ones implementing it. And to your point, a lot of manufacturers, they do not have a good solution, right? They can control the load, but outside of that, um, they don't have a way to talk to that RF, system. And a lot of the lights, they're wired that way. So what I will say is that's a great example, though, of how an architect or designer or a client should work with you as early in the project as possible, so that things can either be wired properly or specified properly, because that fan control with the light built into it, it's a big problem that usually happens at the end, and it makes it hard to fix it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my thought is that also finding a good LED dimmable kind of thing that's integrated into a fan. I haven't really seen that. I tend to would recommend keeping your fans and your lights separate for
Yeah.
that reason.
Nope.
So that's one thing. The second thing is on the 0 to 10 volt control. I know there's a lot of confusion around that, and what my experience says on that is you're running a separate wire for the control, like the dimming, but you're still running high voltage for the actual load. So the light
Correct.
is high volt, but the control of it is low volt. And what that is we vary a voltage between 0 and 10 volts, which is DC low voltage, and then it in sort of echoes that ramping onto the high voltage side, which means that if you're putting a 0 to 10 volt thing in, someone needs to run that extra wire and know about it way far in advance. It's a different module, it's a different everything. Um, I view the 0 to 10 volt, and this is where my question is. I view that as old school. Avoid it. You don't need to use it because we've got forward phase, reverse phase dimming right in the modules now. Why bother with 0 to 10 volt? Is there any reason why you would maybe contradict that and say no, no, we like 0 to 10 volt?
No, I mean, my experience with the vendors we represent is they use 0 to 10 specifically for a true tunable white fixture. Now, I don't know the reasons why. A WRGB fixture can also do tunable white, but it's a little bit more money. And I know some lighting designers will tell you that a true tunable white fixture is more accurate. I don't know enough about that at that level to really comment, but yeah, I'm under the impression 0 to 10 is a little bit older technology as well. It seems like some of the manufacturers are still using it specifically for a tunable white fixture. You definitely have more flexibility with DMX, which is also still a high voltage to the light, but you're using low voltage to control it. But it's much more
Right.
accurate. It's
Well,
easier to
I
program.
want to come back to DMX because that's another topic. We do have a couple of questions coming in here. Angela asks to you, Jason, have you worked to change the lighting in churches? If so, what changes have you made or would you like to make?
So I specifically have not. Most of the projects I'm involved in is more on the residential side, but I will say a lot of people are, a lot of old school churches would use traditional fluorescent lighting, and definitely upgrading to LED lighting is a big advancement. But at the very least, whether it's a church or any project, I would look at a fixture that can do some sort of warm to glow or warm dimming, because it's the closest to an incandescent light bulb and the closest to some sort of natural light. You get up to tunable white, of course, you can do some of the cool things I showed you in WRGB. I guess it depends on what the goals of the church are, but with any project, I would at least look at a fixture with some sort of, warm glow dimming. Jeff, I don't know if you have any experience with churches or other commercial projects.
I mean, not directly. My dad asked me to help out at his church for audio, video, and lighting. One thing I notice is that they tend to go cheap, and when they dim, they make this noise that it's loud. And I don't know if everybody hears that, but when you're all sitting there all quiet in church and you hear like a buzzing of a light because it's dimming, to me that's just somebody chose a really cheap fixture. And I don't know if you've heard that as well, but I can pick up a cheap LED dimmed. It'll either flicker, won't dim to zero, which is really important. Like we all think 10% is good. It's not. You're totally right on that. Or it makes noise. And which brings me to my other point is, how do you know that the fixture is good? Everyone says high quality manufacturer. What does that really mean? Well, I can tell you my experience is, we'll go on, there's a couple of manufacturers out there. Lutron's one. I'm sure Savant has a database as well where you can look it up and someone else has tested it in the lab. Otherwise, we've performed testing for our interior designers where they go find a fixture before they buy 100 of them. We'll bring them in here and we put them on the bench, connect it to the dimmer, and see what happens and test it live. Because I've been fooled so many times with people thinking it's this or that, and then obviously you want to blame the switch when it's usually the LED driver. So I would
Yeah,
say
unfortunately, there's
definitely
not a lot of
test it.
yeah, there's not a lot of standards when it comes to this. I could have Jason's light bulbs tomorrow for really inexpensive and have them shipped here, and but they're not going to be controlled properly. They're all going to be inconsistent with their color temperature, and that's just due
Right.
to lack of certifications and quality manufacturing.
I've seen a number of clients that will go and change every light in their house to LED, and then all the problems happen because they don't really know how to go through that selection process on a retrofit. Hopefully, on a new design, somebody is figuring that out for them, but I've seen as much confusion over picking a light as I do over picking a fan. Fan's worse, obviously, but when in doubt, put it on a bench and test it. And that's something that we do on our projects, especially with these expensive fixtures and before you buy lots and lots of them. So I would say that with regards to the church question with Angela, trying to figure out what, zoning is important, right? Like I want to dim this, maybe light up the altar and other things like that, or dim it during presentations. So zoning is important, but also making sure that you know what fixture is going in there and how it performs through the entire 0 to 100% spectrum.
And that's actually an interesting thing about zoning is if it is a retrofit, and let's say there's you know one circuit, right, for all these 50 lights with these new fixtures, either 0 to 10 or DMX. Now we can actually break those zones up without having to do massive amounts of rewiring. So that's another benefit. So something that's not talked about, but we probably should because it could present another problem is smart bulbs. Right? So smart bulbs kind of show you WRGB and tunable white and some of the great features we talked about, but that comes with its own set of challenges as well. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I just say no to that. Look, if you're in a college dorm room or an apartment dweller, go have fun, right? Knock yourself out. It's a lot of fun. This is not for a house. It doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, who wants to bust open an app and download it just to dim and change? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. You want a switch on the wall. I
Yeah.
think the theory is,
The biggest problem with the smart bulbs is if you turn the light switch off, you've lost everything. But on
yeah.
a different note, we can do a lot of these things with LED strips and still achieve some of the goals. And a lot of those can be integrated through DMX or 0 to 10.
Yeah, so that's interesting on the DMX. So I've encountered that with pool systems and other outdoor systems. And like you say, typically you see that in commercial stages. And it's a serial protocol that you get to send commands to a processor that does the lighting for you. And that's how I've used it. Um, do you see the DMX footprint sort of increasing and finding it's more into residential because it's kind of more complex, you know?
Yeah, in respect to what I kind of showed, I think it is complex, but if you have a really easy to use user interface, you can do some pretty cool things with it. So at our office, we have a Miami scene, and the whole office turns into this pink format, like Miami Vice. So you can do some really interesting things on it, but it all comes down to the programming and also the user interface and the ability to control it.
So you don't really see DMX going away. Would you say that it's going to become more popular if you were guessing?
I think so. One of the things that is advanced in DMX is you probably program these systems, and the addressing can be quite complicated and intense in the programming. So a lot of the DMX protocols now use what's called RDM, and that allows for this auto addressing of the fixtures, which dramatically decreases your programming time, and also it decreases the amount of errors from programming that comes with the traditional addressing the DMX.
Yeah. Can you comment on LED eye? I have a number of people that will ask, oh, it has an external driver like a transformer. I personally view all that as old school, where you have to bury a transformer somewhere and then run a separate wire to the actual fixture. And I know that's the way it was done years ago because we had outboard drivers. Then came integrated LEDs or LED eye, and the smarts in terms of dimming and control was in the actual bulb. What is your thought as far as LED-I versus the external transformer?
I think that's just the advent of technology, right? Parts become smaller and we're allowed to fit them in. I think the only reason I would use an outboard driver or transformer is in the case of possibly a retrofit, or we have some fixtures that are really thin, but they're thin because they have an external driver. So if you're trying to maximize your ceiling height or your drop, but otherwise I would always choose the integrated because it's just a more complete solution. It's it's in line with the latest technology.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well, that there are better solutions out there. I mean, it used to be rope lights and things like that you'd see in coves, that there really was no integrated version of that. But I've seen so many line level, by line level I mean 120 volt fixtures that work very well, and they're LED, and they don't have the need to go and find another place to bury a transformer that gets hot. Obviously you need to remember where you put that kind of thing. So from a service point of view, sometimes people don't know, like, well, where's the driver for this thing? I've seen that happen on multiple occasions. So I kind of shy away from that when I have a choice. Kind of like the 0 to 10 volt is, yeah, I know it's there and we've used it. We've got 0 to 10 volt on some of the fixtures here in the shop. I wish we didn't have it. It's another thing to keep track of. And
Right.
when you talk about cost, there's a module count, and you have to keep track of the 0 to 10 separately from everything else. And maybe there's 4 ports on that, and you're only using one, so you've just wasted that. I mean, there's kind of reasons to optimize away from that. Zoning is another thing that comes up a lot. Jason, do you see the technology changing? Let's say you're doing a retrofit and they've done all of the kitchen hi-hats all on the same switch, but you really want to separate out that island, or other areas in there to create a more tunable scene, but yet they're all looped in. And that would be maybe the only kind of cool thing about having those smarts in a smart bulb, is like you could cherry pick one bulb out of the middle there. Um, and I know DMX addresses this and so forth, but what is your thought as far as if I wanted to create another zoning plan without ripping up my ceiling?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And again, some of the smart bulbs might work if applied and engineered properly, but yeah, with a lot of these technologies, you're able to do that zoning because a lot of these houses weren't wired for that, and so you can break that ceiling plan up and bring things into tied to scenes, or maybe you need different light over here for when you're cooking versus when you're entertaining. So I think that's a big advantage to the lighting control system.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I see that as well. One of the other things that we've gotten into recently is integrating exterior lighting with the interior lighting. And it used to be that these were thought of separately. In other words, you put a time clock on your outside lights and kind of forget about them. They come on and off, whatever, based on one of those little dial intermatic clocks. And then eventually people got smart and put astronomical clocks on those for dusk to dawn and whatnot. But what you'll find is that people have lights on the side of their house that are connected to the house wiring, like accent lights, down lights. I've seen, we have them around our building, soffit lights, if you will, that shine down and create a nice halo effect on the side of the building. And you kind of want those to come on and off at the same time as your landscape lighting. And so integrating them in and having a control system that is a little broader. Then also it's very convenient during the middle of the day when you want to go and check and make sure all your bulbs are working. Maybe you're a service person, hit one button and the landscape lights come on so you can go figure out which bulbs are burned out. It's useful to have a keypad designated in the garage with a button that can turn those on and off. You might hit that button if it's raining out and it's dark, and you want to turn your landscape lights on at 3 in the afternoon rather than dusk. So I see that as a trend where we've actually got several calls in the last month, and people are using the term integrated landscape lighting. And my version of that is being able to control it, not having to go outside with an umbrella and turn a dial on some transformer, being able to hit a button inside the house or on an app. Have
Yep.
you seen that request come up in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much more attention being paid to the outdoor spaces these days, even before the pandemic. But now during the pandemic, people are spending more time outside, right? And so tying in the lighting from the outside to the inside and tying in these scenes or the serviceability you mentioned is definitely something people are paying attention to.
Right, right. And then even the color aspect of it. Halloween's coming around,
Yep.
and if you could light up one tree orange or whatever, and get into that spirit and not have to go out and change anything, it's like you'd never have to decorate again, right?
Yep.
So it applies inside and outside. Is when you have the RGB capability, you just kind of want to use it like seasoning on a steak. You don't want to overdo it. You just do a little bit now and again, right? That kind of a thing. And integrating it in is awesome to be able to have that capability. And it doesn't have to be every light; it could just be some of them.
Yep. Absolutely. Have you guys gotten into any of the lighting with the forefront of wellness as part of the design?
Well, we have. I mean, would say officially no. I mean, we're aware of it. We had seminars in here last year at our tech event, which was October like 25th or something, almost a full year ago. We had a complete seminar dedicated to that in our conference room as part of the tech event. Um, and so we're aware of it and we're learning on it, but I can't say that I've sort of designed something where someone said my chief goal is wellness. But I know that in my own personal life, I have tweaked things um, for that, right? Like that calming effect, and I've created more scenes just to get better educated on it. And I think it's a topic that is growing, especially as we spend more time, um, you know, in our homes and we pay attention to those things. Um, but it's a growing area of interest. I'll just
Yeah,
say it that way.
yeah, no, I agree. And whether it's tied to the tunable white with circadian rhythm, or you just have these scenes that kind of put this calming effect. And as you said, as we spend more time indoors, I think there's a lot of attention being paid to it.
Right, right, absolutely. If you were going to pick the biggest trend in lighting that you think that, if there's like one takeaway from today's thing, as it applies to residential, what would your advice be to everybody as far as that goes? And also, I would also throw out there, should people be looking for a lighting architect when they're doing these selections, or is this now something that we think we can do without engaging, another professional?
So I think as I got into lighting, learning about lighting design was pretty interesting. And there are, you said lighting architect, there's also lighting designers. And I think it depends on the goals of the project, but it's so much from there was a course I took where they showed a room and they showed the different types of lights being installed. And I would think of just, the in ceiling hi hats, but then they had, areas for work and then areas for accent. And there's so many different aspects, and that it has to be done early on, right? You can't make those changes halfway through the project. So I think engaging someone that really understands lighting. I know a lot of technology integrators like yourself are pretty well versed in lighting and can actually do some of these floor plans. So engaging someone, but I would say as far as the biggest trend, there's kind of two things that I think are equally important. I think the ability to paint your room with color is really pretty cool. That one screenshot I showed, like you saw how different the same room looked, and you can do that with light, right? So no longer do you have to have this like specifically designed room. You can accent it differently. So I think that technology is super cool, but also just a high quality light. I've gone to so many beautiful homes and projects, as I'm sure you guys have, and then all these lights turn on, and it's this stale light. You can see the inconsistency between the fixtures, and it just really kills the vibe of the design aspect. So I think choosing a high quality fixture is important. The ability to paint, I think, is also really cool.
So there's another thing, this is residential lighting control, right? So when I walk into a high-end house and I see, 8 light switches at the foyer, the first thing you see when you come in. I've seen them stacked 4 and 4 on top of each other. I've seen a big long horizontal one. And like you say, there's probably P touches, or someone went by with a Sharpie and put a dot on the one that they care about. And then you walk around into the common areas like the family room, living room, and you see the big banks of switches. And you see that in the master bedroom, any place where there's a lot of lights. That to me just screams of poor planning. Somebody did not think that through, and it's just not appropriate anymore when you've got so many choices. The second thing that I see, so like ignoring the fact of lighting control. Any architect plan I get, they're all conventional wiring. We've got to make that change. We come in with the CAD, and then the low voltage guy goes and redraws the CAD and says this is the way we do it, and we would design some sort of a panelized approach to reduce those big switch gains, and then we would most likely do RF, so a hybrid system, so we don't have the expense of everything being home run. And we go through this process with about every single thing, a new house build, I mean, where people are not even aware of it and they don't think it through. They just kind of take whatever comes face value. So that would be sort of my takeaway is don't be afraid of it. The second thing is quit trying to optimize and say, well, we won't do this closet. We won't do that one. We won't do this one. Now it gets more complicated because if you have half of them one way and half another way, you hit that all off in the room and the bathroom stays on because you didn't think that was important enough, or the closet stays on. That wasn't important enough. This has gotten down where it's inexpensive enough that if you plan it out, it's not really that much of a delta from the the original plan. What costs money is when you change, when you go and you do it twice, right? Like we say in AV, no one has time to do it right the first time, but we always have time to do it twice, right? That kind of a thing. It's like because you're second guessing all the time, you think it's going to be expensive, and that process of iterating through is what elongated it and actually added to the expense. So I like the fact that we have the proximity motion detectors that we can add to garages and closets. That's why I like to turn them on. I like the exhaust fans in bathrooms controlled so that the fan isn't running all day long. It just starts a timer when you click it, turns off after 30 minutes. These are things you can do on areas that you would think lighting control isn't really necessary, but it kind of is too when you put that all together, because if you don't use your ceiling fan, then you're going to have a moisture problem in your bathroom. So you should get used to turning it on. But then you have to remember to go turn it off, right? Or the kids leaving lights on or whatever. So, my message to everybody is think about lighting control and zoning, on either a retrofit or on a new construction at the beginning, and don't, try and shove it in at the end, because that's when the changes cost more than just sort of changing the design up front on paper before anything is run.
Not to
And
mention,
then
we
the
can
fact
make
that we've
sure
got
that I was just saying, not to mention, we can make sure that the light fixtures they're going to use are going to be controlled and work properly too if we're brought in early.
right, right, or we'll test them for you as well, and make sure that, like you said, the color temperature is the same across the board on rooms that would be lit up and adjacent, so that everything looks even. So you'd want to make sure that they're all capable of the same color temperature.
Yep.
So anyway, it doesn't look like we've got any other questions coming in, and it's about 5 minutes to 12. So unless there's anybody that's got some questions, I think we could wrap this one up. So I'll leave it open here for a second. No, I'm not seeing any questions come in. Well, I think that we'll call this a wrap for today. And Jason, thank you very much for your time. I always find it informative, and learned a few things today. I hadn't seen this particular presentation, so kudos. It was well done. Thank you very much.